There's a couple more Switch 2 related leaks and stories floating around online that we need to discuss today, starting with one which is actually just a very exciting report that this console, while some people are downplaying the effects of its power when it comes to a graphical standpoint and people saying, oh, it's already last gen before it even releases. I mean, we know, according to reports, it's going to be like at least a full PS4 system in handheld, a PS4 Pro, and then some in docked, and even comparing it up to the Series S in docked gameplay as well. And now we're getting reports like that the dock is going to use a bunch more wattage than we were initially expecting. It's going to have a cooling fan in there, so it can, logically be clocked higher, and it has 12 gigs of RAM as opposed to, I believe it's 10 in the Series S, which ends up being a bottleneck to get some of the current gen games to run effectively on that hardware. Well, we have a supposed third-party developer from a AAA perspective chiming in on this, saying that it will be able to run things. It is very capable when it comes to modern AAA offerings in gaming right now, which is just really good reassurance. And then the other part too of the reports and or supposed leaks going around online that we need to discuss has to do with the Pro controller, some specific new buttons potentially on the back of it, which also might give us maybe a different answer than what we thought those Joy-Con release buttons would be on the back of the console up to this point in time, and a massive new port, which is just like a no-brainer. And I'm certainly hoping that this report is real, because it would be definitely an upgrade of a Pro controller experience overall from Nintendo if this all does check out. So we're going to get on the same page with all of this info. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off by hopping over to our gaming leaks and rumors, where you can see this post which says Switch 2 developer claims that the hardware is very capable. A low-key trusted developer from Install Base responded to a user claiming that Switch 2 wouldn't get AAA games and the system would be weak, and he responded, "It's not. Both Nintendo and third parties see Switch 2 AAA titles as big potential growth driver. The hardware is very capable." He added, "I'm not saying it'll get everything always, but I think a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised." Now, Necro Felipe also chimed in on the discourse online and said, "You'll probably see this right from the first presentation of its lineup." And he is obviously referring to, at that point, like whatever that first look trailer is. We'll probably see some games on there that's just like a holy crap moment that's actually coming to Nintendo Switch 2. Is that really possible? And it is possible. Like, we're talking about, games like Cyberpunk 2077, games like Elden Ring being there probably as a launch game. I'm more or less convinced at this point. From Software was legitimately in Nintendo's most recent investors briefing as like a partner that they are focusing on building that relationship out with. And we have Dark Souls Remastered, a giant open world action adventure RPG game as successful as Elden Ring. Bandai and FromSoft want that on Switch 2 anyway, and it's going to be capable of it. That's honestly also a PS4 and Xbox One game, so there's no reason it can't run. Even if it doesn't look as good as a PS5 running it, it's probably going to be really close. And I think that we're going to see a lot of these modern AAA offerings that are going multi-platform also make it to Switch with the kind of success of the branding of Nintendo Switch, because we've talked about in prior videos and even just the naming thought process that Nintendo's probably going with Switch 2 for this console, and that means 146 plus million users that opted to get a Switch 1 now have a clear message from Nintendo that they have a new version of this hardware. It's been over 8 years at the time that the console will supposedly launch, so Nintendo actually has a big user base of people who are ready to go out and get something more powerful and are wanting that. And I think a plethora of big scale AAA third-party games will just help justify that purchase. We know companies like Square Enix are going aggressively multi-platform this console generation according to their own words, so I think all of your Kingdom Hearts games are definitely on the table. Even Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth at some point, like literally being in the conversation to head to Switch 2 and probably have no issues running. Xbox is in the middle of this everything is an Xbox rebranding and rethinking of their gaming division, which just seems like straight from Microsoft's own CEO that they want to go in this direction of just being the largest game publisher out there and not so much focused on console hardware. They're still going to release a next generation Xbox piece of hardware, but it seems like that's not their focus. Their focus is just play on the Xbox app on whatever device you have, whether that be through like Game Pass or their cloud streaming service. They just want you tied into Microsoft software at some point, and we're seeing that with games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle getting a spring release on the PlayStation 5, their direct competitor. And Microsoft and Nintendo have a much better working relationship than Sony and Microsoft, so if it's coming to Sony's platform, you know that Microsoft is absolutely going to be game to bring everything they can to run on Switch first one, not to mention that we talked about the Series S power comparison. If Microsoft has to get all of their first party software up and running on a Series S anyway, it is not in theory going to be that different from the hoops they'll have to jump through to get it to run on a Nintendo Switch 2 piece of hardware, and they're going to have extra tools at their disposal like DLSS from Nvidia that will help them run the game at a lower base resolution and upscale it with AI, kind of making that magic cheat code type of scenario for better frame rates and better overall more stable performance, which is just a win. So I don't think it's outlandish to say that most modern AAA games will be able to run on Nintendo's next gen platform, and this is coming from a developer that we should be able to believe has actually worked with a dev kit and has some first-hand knowledge of just how powerful and capable this console is, and he's not worried about it. So just reassuring info there. Now, the part 2 of today's conversation has to do with the Pro Controller for Nintendo Switch, because while we've seen a lot of leaks about the console and exactly what it's going to look like with Joy-Cons attached to it, one thing that hasn't been prominently featured is any kind of supposed Pro Controller that Nintendo will absolutely release for their next gen hardware. I mean, it's a $70 full retail add-on for the current Switch. It sells very well. I personally really enjoy my Pro Controller, although, I would change some things in a perfect world. I would make the triggers a little bit more similar to that of a PS5 controller and have some more advanced haptics within the controller, because that really does add into the immersion of games for me when playing through them on PS5, and they have all of that kind of stuff enabled. I do like those additional things, and I just feel like the triggers on the Pro Controller just being like a simple digital button, it's not quite enough. I wish they would bring back analog triggers for the back, and even the bumper buttons could feel a little bit better in my personal opinion. But there are actually 2 different sources that this Nintendo Switch Pro Controller leak or rumor, whatever you want to call it, have stemmed from. And the first one I want to take a look at comes to us from Central Leaks over on Twitter, where they are translating, highlighting, summarizing a post that came from a Chinese forum. And this one's track record a little bit more spotty, or not necessarily verified, I guess you could say, in terms of if they have this information or not. Could be yet another Chinese accessory manufacturer leak, also might not be. So take this one with a grain of salt, but there is reason to believe that the next user we're going to be talking about does have direct knowledge, because we've had a verifiable track record with what they've said being supposed features in this upcoming hardware. But first, you can see new potential Switch 2 Pro Controller leak via a Chinese forum. Shape is still the same as Switch 1 Pro Controller. The main shell is black while the joystick and buttons are gray. Now has a 3.5mm headphone jack, 2 new buttons at the back, GL and GR. Now, to just expand upon the user's post when translated here, you can see just a couple things that Central Leaks didn't point out, where it says the main change is that a 3.5mm headphone jack is added under the controller. You can plug in headphones to play with the controller. Then there are 2 buttons under the controller for the middle finger and ring finger. Now then we have to take a look at a post from Ninspider over on Family Boards, who you might remember is somebody we've talked about really at length, because they were the first individual basically making the claims that the new Joy-Cons would be attaching magnetically. We now more or less know that is going to be a confirmed feature, because we have accessory manufacturers large and small all corroborating that information. Ninspider was one of the first people to put that out there, if not the very first. They also had that crude drawing of the Switch 2 floating around that got a lot of people talking online, the U-shaped kickstand being featured, and a wider, more rounded dock, which we have yet to see the dock, direct evidence of pictures of the dock, but it does seem like, according to a lot of the different reports and shipping manifests and things, having multiple fans, that the dock's probably going to have a fan, and according to these leaks, it does look like it's going to fit that general build, and we know the U-shaped kickstand is more or less a lock because of the accessory manufacturers, so keep that in mind. This is what they said. Ninspider on Family Boards, who shared the drawing of the dock earlier and leaked some other info, says Switch 2 Pro controllers will have extra buttons on the back. He also says the buttons on the Joy-Cons aren't release buttons but actual buttons. And when translating his exact post from Japanese to English via machine translation, you have, "Hello, I survived the ninja chase. For several reasons, this I am writing in Japanese using machine translation. This may be the last post before that time. Here's some solid information. There are 2 new buttons added to the back of the Pro controller, and it's likely that the back buttons on the new Joy-Cons are for input rather than release. In addition, there is some unconfirmed information, but 1 week after the new year in Japan might be that time. However, it is also possible that it will just be new information about the Xenoblade Chronicles X port. There will probably be no new information in December. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. So you may have noticed maybe a little bit of conflicting information there, because that first post we were reading from a maybe Chinese accessory manufacturer, it sounded like there were two buttons, like one for the middle finger and the ring finger, which more sounds like those back paddle buttons if you've ever held a controller that has those. I personally feel like those just get in the way and never end up using them. I know some people like them, but that sounds like something that might be tied to a third-party controller and having additional buttons to support, and not necessarily the first-party Pro controller. However, they did say things like the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, and they were referencing it as the Switch 2 Pro controller, so maybe not. But Ninspider's post definitely points out specifically that there are two new buttons total on the back, and he also believes that the Joy-Con buttons that we've been seeing on the back of the Joy-Con at the top themselves, that you've seen in all the renders and mock-ups and things, that those are probably going to be input buttons and not Joy-Con release buttons like many of us were expecting up to this point in time. Now that causes an interesting question for me in my head, because then are we really just going to magnetically be able to detach the Joy-Cons, but they're still going to feel secure enough when locked in with the magnet locking mechanism? And is there a lock mechanism or not? Does the C button actually connect or deconnect the Joy-Cons, and it's more of that mag switch technology, like an electromagnetism, like we've kind of talked about? That becomes a bigger mystery if those are input buttons on the back, because I do feel like you would want to have some kind of more secure release than just having to pull your Joy-Con hard enough off of the side of the console to detach it. So that's again, interesting claim, but we're not going to have to wait much longer for this stuff. And I guess some of the hype around Ninspider's post also is that he's hearing something in early January, which does line up with what Chris Dring was saying, that maybe right at the new year or right after the new year, Nintendo would have some news around their next gen hardware. And that's maybe coming from third-party sources. Who knows if Nintendo's doing some kind of unrelated event, but I do feel like the next event or big announcement we get from Nintendo will likely be Switch 2. If it's not, it's a Xenoblade Chronicles X update, which would make sense as well. But I think that we're getting close to that time where Nintendo's made it past the holiday season and the sales for that, and they're going to start to market their next generation hardware very early into 2025. So fortunately, we don't have to wait too much longer to see if this is accurate info, but I know the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack for me personally would be a huge win. I just think that makes a ton of sense to do the headphone jack that way when you're playing with the Pro controller. Again, another use case that I use with my PS5 controller, I sometimes plug in a wired headset. There's no lag, there's no latency, you can hear everything just fine if you're in an environment where you're not using like your sound system or going through speakers and stuff like that. You actually just want an easy way to be able to listen to your game directly to you in a headset. You can plug in any 3.5 millimeter headset and it just works through the controller. I think that would be a big update and a big win for Nintendo's next gen Pro controller. So I'm hopeful that this information does check out. The buttons, maybe they seem like a little bit overkill at that point. Like, what are those back buttons going to be used for in most regular gameplay? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. So let me know what you make of this when it comes to Nintendo maybe having additional input buttons this time around, and the overall claims that this console is probably going to be very capable when it comes to running modern AAA titles, whether they come from Nintendo or not. So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also, make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.